I'm Amber Harris, 28, and last month my world shattered when my dad was diagnosed with a serious heart condition. When Mom tearfully asked for my gold credit card to pay for his specialized treatment, I handed it over without hesitation. A week later, while scrolling through Instagram, I froze. There was my sister Heather, lounging on a Hawaiian beach. When confronted, she smiled and said, "Thanks to your credit card, but don't worry, I only used $100,000. I laughed and replied, "My card has only $100. If you're watching this from your cozy bedroom, hit subscribe and let me know where you'd spend $100,000 if you had it, unlike my sister who only thought she did." Let me rewind a bit so you understand how we got here. I've always been the responsible one in my family. After graduating from Boston University with a marketing degree, I struggled for nearly a year working retail while sending out countless resumes. The competition in Boston's marketing scene was brutal, but I finally landed an entry-level position at Meridian Marketing, one of the most prestigious firms in the city. For the past 5 years, I've worked tirelessly, often staying until midnight, taking on projects nobody wanted, and building my reputation client by client. Just 2 months ago, I was promoted to senior marketing strategist, which came with a substantial pay raise. Throughout these years, I've built excellent credit. I remember the day I qualified for the gold card. It felt like a tangible symbol of my financial responsibility. Unlike many of my colleagues who immediately maxed out their limits on designer clothes or vacation packages, I maintained a strict budget. I've always transferred money to my card only when needed for specific purchases, keeping just a minimal balance otherwise. This habit started after my identity was nearly stolen in college, making me paranoid about financial security. My dad, Thomas Harris, is everything to me. He taught high school history for 35 years in our hometown of Worcester, Massachusetts. He's the kind of teacher former students still stop to thank decades later. Dad raised me with clear values about money and honesty. "Money comes and goes," he'd say, "but your integrity, once lost, is hard to recover." Every Sunday growing up, he'd sit with me at the kitchen table to explain concepts like compound interest, emergency funds, and the difference between needs and wants. When I got my first paycheck from a summer job at 16, he helped me open a savings account and taught me to save 20% of everything I earned. My mother, Catherine, on the other hand, has always had a complicated relationship with money. She grew up in relative poverty and developed an obsession with appearances. Our home always had to have the newest furniture, even if it meant maxing out credit cards. She leased new cars every 2 years to keep up with the Joneses, as Dad would say with a sigh. When I was in high school, I discovered she had secretly opened a credit card in Dad's name that he knew nothing about, with a balance of over $15,000. Dad forgave her after she promised to attend financial counseling, but I noticed the pattern continued, just more discreetly. Then there's my sister Heather, who's 25 and has never held a job for more than 3 months. She majored in communication at a private college that drained my parents' savings, only to drop out in her senior year because she wasn't feeling it anymore. Since then, she's lived in my parents' basement, occasionally mentioning vague business ideas that never materialize. Heather has always been Mom's favorite. They share the same love for luxury and appearances. Growing up, Heather would often borrow my clothes without asking, returning them stained or damaged. When I complained to our parents, Mom would say I was being selfish while Dad would try to mediate, usually unsuccessfully. The family financial situation had deteriorated significantly in recent years. Dad's teaching pension wasn't as substantial as they had hoped, and Mom's sporadic work as a real estate agent wasn't bringing in consistent income. Their retirement savings had been depleted by poor investment choices Mom had made without consulting Dad, plus the cost of Heather's unfinished education. I knew they were struggling but didn't realize how bad it was until Dad's diagnosis. It happened suddenly. Dad had been experiencing shortness of breath for weeks, but dismissed it as just getting older. When he nearly collapsed while mowing the lawn, Mom finally convinced him to see a doctor. The diagnosis was severe aortic stenosis complicated by an irregular heartbeat. He needed a specialized procedure that wasn't fully covered by their insurance. The cardiologist recommended a particular specialist in Boston who had pioneering techniques but didn't accept their insurance plan. The estimated cost for everything would be around $75,000. 3 weeks ago, Mom showed up at my apartment unannounced. Her eyes were red from crying, and she clutched a folder full of medical paperwork. "Amber, I don't know what to do," she sobbed as I made her tea. "The doctor says if your father doesn't get this procedure within the next month, he could." She couldn't finish the sentence. I sat beside her on my sofa, scanning the medical documents with growing concern. "Have you checked if there are other specialists who accept your insurance?" I asked. "We've tried everything. This Dr. Reynolds is the only one with the success rate your father needs for his particular condition." She placed her hand on mine. "Amber, I hate to ask this, but is there any way you could help?" "Just temporarily. We've applied for a medical loan, but it won't come through for at least 2 months." I hesitated, memories of previous broken promises flashing through my mind. When I was saving for my first apartment, Mom had borrowed $3,000 for what she called essential house repairs that turned out to be a kitchen renovation they couldn't afford. It took over a year to get that money back, and only after multiple uncomfortable conversations. "I don't have that kind of cash available, Mom," I said honestly. "What about your gold card? The one you mentioned has a high limit." Her eyes brightened with hope. "Just until the loan comes through. I swear we'll pay back every penny." I walked to my bedroom and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the gold card in my wallet. This was for Dad, not for Mom's impulsive spending or Heather's latest whim. This was literally life or death. When I returned to the living room, I held out the card. "This is only for Dad's medical expenses," I said firmly. "I need receipts for everything." "Of course, sweetheart," Mom said, clutching the card like a lifeline. "I'll keep track of every dollar. Thank you for saving your father." She hugged me tightly, and despite my reservations, I felt good knowing I could help Dad when he needed it most. As she was leaving, I added, "Mom, remember the card has a high limit, but I transfer money to it only when needed. Call me before any charges so I can move funds accordingly." "Don't worry, we'll coordinate everything," she promised, wiping away tears of gratitude. "You're such a blessing, Amber." I watched her drive away with a mixture of hope and unease. Little did I know that this act of love would unravel our family in ways I couldn't imagine. The first few days after giving Mom my card seemed normal. She sent text messages with vague updates about appointments being scheduled and consultations with Dr. Reynolds. "Your father is being so brave," one message read. "The doctor says we caught it just in time." I was in the middle of the biggest project of my career, rebranding a major financial institution that could double our agency's revenue if successful. My days stretched into nights at the office, ordering takeout with my team and falling asleep on the small sofa in our conference room only to wake up and continue working. I barely had time to check my personal emails, let alone visit my parents who lived an hour away. On the 5th day after giving Mom my card, I called Dad during my lunch break. "How are you feeling?" "Mom says the new doctor is optimistic." There was a pause on the line. "What new doctor?" "I've only seen Dr. Mitchell, same as always." My stomach tightened. "Aren't you scheduled with a specialist in Boston?" "Dr. Reynolds." "First I'm hearing of it," Dad said, confusion evident in his voice. "Catherine mentioned something about looking into additional options, but we haven't made any decisions yet." I quickly changed the subject, not wanting to worry him, but a seed of doubt had been planted. That evening, despite my exhaustion, I decided to check social media before bed, something I rarely had time for during big projects. The first post on my Instagram feed made my blood run cold. It was Heather, my sister, posing on a beach with a tropical drink in hand. The caption read, "Surprise vacation. Sometimes you just need to treat yourself." Hashtag Hawaii, hashtag luxury life, hashtag blessed. The timestamp showed it was posted earlier that day. My first thought was rational. Perhaps she had saved up for this trip, or maybe she was there with a new boyfriend who was covering expenses. Heather had always found ways to enjoy luxuries despite her lack of steady income. But as I scrolled further, more photos appeared. Heather checking into the Grand Wailea Resort, one of the most expensive hotels in Maui. Heather shopping at high-end boutiques, bags from Gucci and Prada visible in the photos. Heather dining at a restaurant I recognized from a travel magazine as having $200 tasting menus. My heart raced as I called my mother. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. I texted, "Need to talk about Dad's treatment. Call me ASAP." No response came that night. The next morning, I called Dad again. "Has Mom been home this week?" I asked as casually as possible. "She's been in and out," he replied. Said she's been meeting with financial advisors about medical payments. "Why do you ask?" "Just checking in," I said, not wanting to stress him. "How about Heather? Is she around?" She mentioned something about a trip with friends. To be honest, I haven't seen much of either of them lately. I've been resting a lot. After hanging up, I called Dad's cardiologist, Dr. Mitchell, claiming I needed information for insurance purposes. The receptionist confirmed what I feared. We haven't scheduled any new treatments or referred Mr. Harris to any specialists recently. His next regular appointment is in 2 weeks. I spent my lunch break diving deeper into Heather's social media. The timeline became clear. She had left for Hawaii the day after Mom got my credit card. Her posts tagged friends I didn't recognize and mentioned a week-long stay at one of the island's most exclusive resorts. One photo showed her parasailing with the caption, "Always wanted to try this. Living my best life." In desperation, I called Janet, my parents' neighbor and Mom's close friend. "Janet, this is awkward, but have you seen my mom lately? I've been trying to reach her about Dad." "Oh, Catherine mentioned she'd be hard to reach," Janet said cheerfully. "She's helping Heather with that surprise vacation." So thoughtful of them to arrange such a nice trip. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. My card wasn't being used for Dad's life-saving treatment. It was funding Heather's luxury vacation in Hawaii. The realization hit me physically, making me rush to the bathroom where I threw up my lunch. Back at my desk, I called the credit card company, but without knowing specific charges, they could only confirm that the card was indeed being used and approaching its limit. That evening, I couldn't concentrate on work. I left early, ignoring concerned looks from my colleagues. In my apartment, I paced back and forth, alternating between rage and disbelief. How could they do this? How could Mom prioritize Heather's vacation over Dad's health? And how could Heather accept such an extravagant gift knowing where the money was supposed to go? I broke down sobbing on my kitchen floor, feeling betrayed by the people I should have been able to trust most. Through my tears, I made a decision. I would confront them directly when they returned, with evidence in hand. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about a fundamental breach of trust and the exploitation of my love for my father. Over the next 2 days, I documented everything, screenshots of Heather's posts, records of my conversations with Dad's doctor, the text messages from Mom about fictional appointments. I couldn't eat or sleep properly, constantly checking my phone for credit card alerts. Each new charge notification felt like another stab of betrayal. Finally, a week after giving Mom my card, I received a text, "We'll be home tomorrow. Good news about your father's treatment options. Can't wait to tell you everything." The audacity of the lie only strengthened my resolve. Tomorrow, they would have to face what they had done. I rehearsed what I would say dozens of times during my drive to Worcester. Should I start with understanding and give them a chance to confess? Or should I lay out the evidence immediately? My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The folder of printed screenshots and credit card statements sat on the passenger seat like a ticking bomb. It was dinner time when I arrived unannounced at my parents' house. Through the dining room window, I could see the three of them sitting around the table. Mom was serving what looked like a celebration dinner. The good china was out, candles were lit, and a bottle of expensive champagne stood open. Dad looked tired, but was smiling as Heather animatedly told a story, her hands gesturing wildly. I stood frozen on the porch for a moment, taking in this bizarre scene. Dad still looked ill, his face was pale, and he moved gingerly when reaching for his water glass. Whatever treatment Mom had claimed to be arranging clearly hadn't happened. When I rang the doorbell, Mom answered with a surprised expression that quickly shifted to nervous enthusiasm. "Amber, what a wonderful surprise! We were just about to call you with the good news." She ushered me inside. Heather's smile faltered slightly when she saw me, but she quickly recovered. "Hey sis, perfect timing. I was just telling Dad about the amazing sunrise I saw from the hotel balcony." Dad looked genuinely happy to see me. "Amber, you shouldn't work so hard. You look exhausted. Come, sit down and have some dinner." I took a seat, accepting the plate Mom hurriedly prepared for me. The tension inside me was building, but I decided to play along temporarily, curious how far they would take this charade. "So, what's the good news about Dad's treatment?" I asked, looking directly at Mom. "Oh yes." She brightened. "Dr. Reynolds thinks your father is an excellent candidate for the new procedure. We've scheduled it for next month, and he's very optimistic about the outcome." Dad looked confused. "Dr. Reynolds? Is that the specialist you mentioned?" "Catherine, you didn't tell me anything was scheduled." Mom's smile tightened. "I was waiting until it was confirmed, dear. I didn't want to get your hopes up prematurely." I took a sip of water, buying time to control my anger. "That's interesting. When I called Dr. Mitchell earlier this week, his office wasn't aware of any referrals to specialists." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Mom laughed nervously. "Oh, there must be some miscommunication. These medical offices can be so disorganized with their paperwork." "Heather," I said, turning to my sister who was suddenly very interested in her mashed potatoes. "How was Hawaii? The Grand Wailea Resort looks beautiful in your photos." She brightened instantly, oblivious to the tension. "It was amazing. The spa treatments alone were worth the trip. And the shopping. I found this gorgeous Gucci bag that was the last one in stock." "Sounds expensive," I commented. "Where did you get the money for all that?" "Last I heard, you were between jobs." Heather exchanged a quick glance with Mom, who gave a slight nod. "Well," Heather said with a smirk, "I was going to tell you eventually." Mom thought it would be better coming from me. She reached for her wine glass. "I used your credit card, but don't worry, I only used around $100,000. There's still plenty of limit left for Dad's procedure." The casual way she admitted to stealing from me and the implied assumption that I would be okay with it left me momentarily speechless. Dad's fork clattered onto his plate. "You did what?" he asked, looking between Heather and Mom. Mom jumped in quickly. "Now Thomas, don't get upset. It's not good for your heart. Amber agreed to help with medical expenses, and we will use the card for that too. But Heather has been so stressed lately, and the doctor said a vacation would be the perfect thing for her anxiety." "What doctor?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Dr. Feldman, my therapist," Heather said defensively. "He said I was on the verge of a breakdown from the pressure of figuring out my career path." I opened my folder and placed Heather's Instagram posts on the table. "So instead of using my card for Dad's life-saving treatment as promised, you took my sister on a luxury vacation to Hawaii?" "Now Amber," Mom said in her placating voice, "you're making it sound so black and white. We'll use the rest for your father later. The medical loan is still being processed, and Heather really needed this break. You have a stable job and a good income. Can't you be happy for your sister?" Dad was looking through the printed photos, his expression changing from confusion to hurt to anger. "Catherine, you told me you were arranging medical consultations these past days. Were you actually in Hawaii with Heather?" "I was handling both," Mom insisted. I was making calls about your treatment while Heather enjoyed the resort. Multitasking. The situation was escalating quickly. Mom called her sister, my Aunt Paula, who lived nearby, apparently hoping for reinforcement. When Aunt Paula arrived and heard what happened, she surprisingly took my side. "Catherine, this is beyond the pale," she said, shaking her head. Using money meant for Thomas's heart condition to send Heather to Hawaii? What were you thinking? "You don't understand," Mom said defensively. "Amber can afford it. She's always been selfish with her money." "Selfish?" I repeated, my voice rising. "I gave you my credit card because I thought Dad might die without treatment. How is that selfish?" Heather rolled her eyes. "You're being so dramatic. It's just money. You can make more." That's when Dad spoke up, his voice quiet but firm. "This isn't the first time, is it, Catherine? You've done similar things before." Mom's face paled. "I don't know what you mean. The missing retirement funds from last year that you said were lost in a market downturn. The second mortgage on the house that appeared mysteriously. The credit card in my name I never applied for." Dad looked heartbroken. "Where did all that money go?" Mom had no answer, but her eyes darted briefly to Heather, who was suddenly very interested in her nails. The confrontation continued for hours. Mom cycled through various tactics: justification, minimization, deflection, and finally tearful apologies that seemed more about getting caught than actual remorse. Heather alternated between defiance and playing the victim. Other family members called and took different sides, some saying I should forgive and forget because family, others appalled by the betrayal. Through it all, I remained calmer than I expected, letting them talk themselves into deeper trouble with each new justification. When Mom claimed she'd always intended to pay me back with her next real estate commission, Aunt Paula reminded everyone that Mom hadn't sold a house in over 2 years. When Heather insisted she needed the vacation for her mental health, Uncle Robert asked why a local spa day wouldn't have sufficed. Eventually, when they had run out of excuses, I spoke. "I think it's time I showed you something else," I said, pulling out my phone and opening my banking app. "That's interesting," I said calmly, looking directly at Heather, because my card only has a $100 limit unless I transfer funds to it. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom's face drained of color, and Heather's jaw literally dropped open. Dad looked confused, then the realization dawned on his face, followed by something I hadn't seen often: a small, vindicating smile. "What do you mean, $100 limit?" Heather finally stammered. "The charges went through. I bought first-class tickets. I stayed in a luxury suite." I held up my phone, showing my banking app. After my identity was nearly stolen in college, I developed a habit. I keep my cards at a minimum limit and transfer money only when I'm about to make a purchase. It's a security measure. But, Mom was struggling to comprehend. "How did the charges go through then?" "They haven't," I explained. "They're pending authorization." Credit card companies often approve charges temporarily, especially for trusted merchants like airlines and hotels. But within 24 to 72 hours, if the funds aren't there, the charges are reversed and reported as fraud. Heather's face contorted as the implications sank in. "So, all those purchases were never actually approved," I finished for her. "And since I never authorized you to use my card, and it was obtained under false pretenses." I let the sentence hang in the air. Heather suddenly rushed to the bathroom, the sound of retching following shortly after. Mom collapsed into a chair, her carefully constructed deception crumbling around her. Dad reached over and squeezed my hand. "You knew all along?" "Not all along," I admitted. But I became suspicious almost immediately. When I confirmed what was happening, I called the credit card company to alert them, but decided to let this play out a bit. Mom returned from checking on Heather, her face ashen. "We have to fix this, Amber. You have to transfer the money to cover the charges." I looked at her incredulously. "Are you serious right now? You lied to me, stole my credit card, and used it fraudulently. And your solution is for me to pay for it anyway? But Heather will be in so much trouble. Mom wailed. They'll call it credit card fraud. It is credit card fraud, Dad said firmly, surprising us both. Catherine, do you understand what you've done? You could have cost Amber her financial reputation, not to mention stolen from her. Mom switched tactics, tears flowing freely now. Amber, sweetie, I'm your mother. I've given everything for you. You can't let this happen to your sister and me. We're family. For a moment, I felt the familiar pull of guilt and obligation that had defined our relationship for years. But something had fundamentally changed inside me. The manipulation wasn't working anymore. I pulled out my phone again and dialed the credit card company's fraud department, putting it on speaker. Hello, this is Amber Harris. I'm calling about my gold card ending in 4735. Mom lunged for the phone, but Dad caught her arm, shaking his head firmly. Yes, I'd like to confirm that those charges from Hawaii were not authorized by me. My card was taken under false pretenses and used fraudulently. I looked directly at Mom as I spoke. I can provide all details necessary for your investigation. After finishing the call, I gathered my things to leave. Mom was sobbing on the couch while Heather had emerged from the bathroom, her mascara streaked down her face. You can't just leave, Heather shouted. You have to fix this. They said the hotel might press charges if the payment doesn't clear. You're 25 years old, Heather, I said tiredly. It's time you faced consequences for your actions. But I could go to jail, she shrieked. You should have thought about that before stealing $100,000. Mom tried one last tactic. If you walk out that door, you're no longer part of this family. Dad stood up shakily. No, Catherine. If Amber walks out that door, it's because you and Heather pushed her out with your actions. And if that happens, I'll be walking out right behind her. I left the house with those words hanging in the air, Dad's support giving me strength I didn't know I needed. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of emotions, relief at having confronted them, vindication that the fraud wouldn't impact my finances, but also deep grief for the family relationships that might never be the same. That night, alone in my apartment, I alternated between crying and feeling a strange sense of liberation. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from Mom and Heather, ranging from desperate apologies to thinly veiled threats about family abandonment. I silenced the notifications and tried to sleep. Around midnight, my phone rang with Dad's ringtone. I answered immediately, worried about his health. Dad? Are you okay? I'm fine, physically at least, he said, his voice tired but clear. I just wanted you to know that I'm proud of you, Amber. What you did today took courage. His words unleashed fresh tears. I didn't want it to be this way. I know, sweetheart. Neither did I. But sometimes the truth needs to come out for healing to begin. What Catherine and Heather did was wrong, and they need to understand that. We talked for nearly an hour, Dad sharing his own realizations about the patterns of behavior he had enabled over the years. Before hanging up, he promised to see his doctor about legitimate treatment options that their insurance would cover. I love you, Amber, he said. Never doubt that. I love you too, Dad. After we hung up, I fell into the first peaceful sleep I'd had in weeks, knowing that whatever happened next, I had done the right thing. The credit card company's investigation began immediately. A fraud specialist named Marcus contacted me the next day for a detailed statement. I provided everything, the text messages from Mom about Dad's fictional medical treatment, screenshots of Heather's Instagram posts, and a timeline of events. Unfortunately, Ms. Harris, this happens more often than you might think, Marcus told me. Family fraud is actually quite common, and it's usually the hardest for victims to report. Will charges be pressed automatically? I asked, still conflicted about the potential legal consequences for my sister and mother. That depends on several factors. The credit card company will certainly pursue recovery of any funds that were actually spent. As for criminal charges, that's typically up to the cardholder, whether to press charges. However, the merchants involved, especially for large purchases, may pursue their own fraud cases. The reality of the situation hit Heather hard and fast. The day after our confrontation, she called me in a panic. The hotel is saying I need to pay them $24,000 immediately or they're calling the police. Her voice was shrill with fear. Amber, you have to help me. I can't, Heather. I don't have $24,000 to give you, and even if I did, that wouldn't solve the problem. What about all the other charges? I'm trying to return some of the things I bought, she said desperately. But the stores are saying items like the Gucci bag were final sale. I felt a twinge of sympathy despite everything. Heather, I think you need to talk to a lawyer. A lawyer? I can't afford a lawyer. That's the whole problem. The irony of her statement wasn't lost on me. There are legal aid services that might be able to help. But Heather, you need to understand the seriousness of what happened here. I know, she said quickly. I made a terrible mistake. But you're my sister. You can't let me go to jail. This isn't about me letting anything happen. This is about the choices you made. After hanging up, I received a barrage of voicemails from Mom, each more desperate than the last. The first few were tearful apologies. Amber, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I never meant for things to go this far. Please call me back so we can fix this together. By the afternoon, the tone had shifted. Amber Harris, I am your mother, and you will not destroy this family with your stubbornness. If you don't help your sister, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. And by evening, I've spoken to your Aunt Linda, and she agrees you're being unnecessarily cruel. Family helps family, Amber. Your father is devastated by your behavior. That last claim prompted me to call Dad directly. He answered on the first ring. Don't believe everything your mother says, he told me wearily. I'm not devastated by your behavior. I'm devastated by the situation. The extended family quickly divided into factions. My mother's siblings largely took her side, flooding my inbox with messages about forgiveness and family loyalty. Dad's side of the family, particularly Aunt Paula and Uncle Robert, supported my decision to report the fraud, with Aunt Paula even offering to let me stay with her if I needed space from the situation. The stress began affecting my work performance. During an important client presentation, I completely lost my train of thought and stood frozen before the boardroom for what felt like an eternity. My boss, Diane, pulled me aside afterward. Amber, this isn't like you. Is everything okay? I broke down and told her a condensed version of what was happening. To my surprise, she was incredibly supportive. Take the rest of the week off, she insisted. This project is important, but your well-being matters more. We can reschedule the follow-up meeting. Meanwhile, Dad's health was deteriorating from the stress. He called to tell me he'd had a minor episode that sent him back to the hospital for observation. The doctor says the emotional strain isn't helping my condition, he admitted. But don't blame yourself, Amber. This isn't your fault. But I couldn't help feeling guilty. If I hadn't exposed the fraud, would Dad be doing better? The rational part of me knew that the deception would have been revealed eventually, probably in an even more catastrophic way, but the emotional weight was still crushing. Heather's situation worsened when she learned she might face actual criminal charges. The credit card company had referred the case to their legal department, and because of the amount involved, nearly $100,000, it was being taken very seriously. They're saying it could be grand larceny, she sobbed over the phone. I could get up to 15 years in prison. Amber, please, you have to tell them you authorized me to use the card. I can't lie, Heather. That would make me complicit in fraud. But it's just a statement. Just say you changed your mind about pressing charges. It doesn't work that way. There's documented evidence that I never gave permission and that the card was obtained under false pretenses. Mom's attempts to manipulate Dad against me intensified. She convinced him to move into their bedroom downstairs because climbing stairs was becoming difficult for him. Then she limited his phone access, claiming he needed rest without disturbances. It took me 3 days to realize she was screening his calls, only letting him talk to family members who sided with her and Heather. When I finally got through to him by calling from a different number, Dad sounded exhausted. "Your mother is making this very difficult, Amber. She's convinced that if you just cooperate, everything will go back to normal." I've tried explaining that normal wasn't working for us anyway, but she doesn't want to hear it. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Winters, to help process the complex emotions I was experiencing. During our first session, I broke down completely. "I feel like I've destroyed my family," I admitted through tears. "From what you've described," Dr. Winters said gently, "your family was already in trouble. Your mother and sister's actions revealed existing problems. You didn't create them. But if I had just let it go, then what message would that have sent? That it's okay to lie to you? That your boundaries don't matter? That your sister's vacation was more important than your father's health?" Over the following weeks, Dr. Winters helped me understand the dysfunctional family dynamics I'd been entrenched in for years. We identified patterns of enabling behavior, emotional manipulation, and the uneven distribution of respect and responsibility between Heather and me. "What you're describing," she explained, "is fairly classic family roles. You've been cast as the responsible one, the fixer, while your sister has been allowed to remain in a perpetual state of dependence. Your mother enables this dynamic, and your father, while loving, has been somewhat passive in challenging it." The insight was painful but illuminating. I began to see how my own behaviors, always coming to the rescue, never setting firm boundaries, had contributed to the situation. Meanwhile, the legal situation continued to evolve. The hotel in Hawaii had filed a formal complaint about the fraudulent payment. 2 luxury boutiques were pursuing charges for the unpaid merchandise. The credit card company's investigation was concluding, and they were preparing to make a decision about criminal referrals. 40 days after the confrontation, I faced a critical decision point. The credit card company's fraud department called to ask if I wanted to press charges against my mother and sister. If I declined, they would still pursue recovery of funds, but might not refer the case for criminal prosecution. "Ms. Harris," the fraud investigator said, "this is ultimately your decision. There's no right or wrong answer here. But I should inform you that declining to press charges doesn't erase the fraud that occurred, and the merchants involved may still pursue their own legal action." I sat in my apartment that evening, weighing the heaviest decision of my life. Could I live with myself if Heather went to jail? Could I live with myself if I let her escape all consequences? What about Mom? What about Dad's declining health? As I contemplated these questions, my phone rang. It was Dad, calling from Aunt Paula's house where he had temporarily moved to reduce the stress at home. "Amber," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks, "whatever you decide tomorrow, I want you to know I support you. You've always been my rock, and I'm sorry I didn't protect you more from the patterns in our family." His words gave me the clarity I needed to make my decision. 3 days after my conversation with Dad, he was hospitalized again. His cardiologist called me directly this time. "Ms. Harris, your father's condition has deteriorated significantly. The emotional stress has accelerated his symptoms, and we need to move forward with treatment immediately. The procedure we discussed earlier is now urgent." "What's the timeline?" I asked, my hand shaking as I held the phone. "Days, not weeks. And I have to be honest, without intervention, his prognosis is not good." I thanked the doctor and immediately called the hospital's billing department to discuss payment options. The procedure would cost approximately $68,000 after insurance. They offered a payment plan, but required a substantial down payment that I didn't have immediately available without liquidating my emergency fund and retirement account, which would incur significant penalties. Within an hour of that call, Mom showed up at my apartment, looking haggard but determined. "I know you're still angry with me," she said when I reluctantly let her in, "but this is about your father now. The doctor says he needs the procedure immediately, and we need your financial help." I'm already working with the hospital on payment options, I said, maintaining my distance. But they want a large down payment right away, Mom pressed. If you would just drop the fraud charges, we could work something out with the credit card company. Maybe they would extend your limit temporarily for a medical emergency. I stared at her in disbelief. You're still trying to manipulate the situation? Dad could die, and you're focused on getting Heather out of trouble. That's not fair, Mom protested, though her eyes darted away from mine. I'm thinking about your father. But yes, I'm also thinking about your sister. She's facing criminal charges, Amber. Our family is falling apart, and you have the power to fix it. I didn't break our family, Mom. You and Heather did that when you stole my card and lied about Dad's treatment. Mom collapsed onto my sofa, finally showing genuine emotion. I know what we did was wrong. I've always protected Heather too much, given her things I couldn't afford, shielded her from consequences. But I never thought it would go this far. She looked up at me, her eyes red. I was so focused on giving Heather the life I never had that I lost sight of what really matters. It was the first honest thing she'd said since this began, but I remained cautious. Dad needs treatment, and I'll make sure he gets it. But I'm not going through you to do it. I spent the next day researching every possible option for financing Dad's procedure. I spoke with medical finance companies, investigated hospital charity programs, and even considered a personal loan. Eventually, I made the decision to liquidate my emergency fund and take the tax hit on a partial withdrawal from my retirement account. It would set me back financially for years, but Dad's life was worth more than money. Meanwhile, Heather had been making changes of her own. To my surprise, she had found a job as a receptionist at a local dental office and had been selling her designer clothes and accessories online to raise money. She called me tentatively. Amber, I know you probably don't want to talk to me, but I heard about Dad. I'm trying to help. Her voice was missing its usual entitlement. I've raised about $7,000 so far from selling my stuff. It's not much compared to what I took, but I want you to have it for Dad's treatment. I was speechless for a moment. You're selling your things? Everything I bought in Hawaii and more, she confirmed. I've also started this job. It's not glamorous, but it's something. And I'm meeting with a court-appointed attorney tomorrow about the fraud charges. It was the first sign that Heather might actually be taking responsibility for her actions. That's good, Heather. I know it doesn't fix what I did. Nothing can. But I want you to know I'm trying to change. After hanging up, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Was Heather's transformation genuine, or was this another manipulation tactic? Only time would tell, but the $7,000 would certainly help with Dad's medical expenses. The next day, I drove to the hospital to visit Dad. He looked frail in the hospital bed, monitors beeping steadily around him. When he saw me, his face lit up. There's my girl, he said, reaching for my hand. I sat beside him, fighting back tears. Dad, I've arranged to pay for your procedure. It's happening tomorrow morning. His eyes widened. Amber, that's too much. Your mother mentioned you might help, but I had no idea you were covering everything. Not everything, I clarified. The insurance is covering part, and believe it or not, Heather is contributing what she can. Dad looked surprised. Heather? Our Heather. I nodded. She's selling her things and has started a job. A smile spread across Dad's tired face. Well, I'll be damned. Maybe something good is coming from this mess after all. We spent the next hour talking honestly about the family dynamics that had led us here. For the first time, Dad acknowledged his role in enabling Mom's financial irresponsibility and Heather's entitlement. I always thought keeping the peace was the most important thing, he admitted. I didn't want to rock the boat, so I looked the other way too often. I failed you by not standing up more, Amber. You didn't fail me, Dad. You taught me values that have served me well. But yes, sometimes peace comes at too high a price. Before leaving, I made it clear that my payment for his procedure was going directly to the hospital, not through Mom. Dad understood and agreed it was the wisest approach. That evening, I met with Mom at a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between our homes. I laid out my terms clearly. I'm paying for Dad's procedure directly. Not through you, not with my credit card. I've already made arrangements with the hospital. Mom nodded, surprisingly compliant. Going forward, I continued, I'm setting clear boundaries. I love you, but I don't trust you right now. That trust will need to be rebuilt over time. What about the fraud charges? She asked tentatively. I've been thinking about that, I said. I'm willing to tell the credit card company I don't want to pursue criminal charges against you and Heather on several conditions. Mom leaned forward eagerly. First, you both take financial responsibility classes, real ones, not online seminars. Second, Heather continues working and establishes a payment plan for restitution. Third, you seek therapy to address why you've enabled her behavior for so long. And finally, Dad has equal access to all financial information and decisions going forward. Mom's face showed a mix of relief and resistance. That's a lot to ask. It's actually very little considering the alternative, I pointed out. And these aren't arbitrary demands. They're necessary steps for healing for all of us. After some negotiation, Mom agreed to my terms. I made it clear that any violation would result in me reconsidering my position on the criminal charges. The next step was family counseling. I arranged a session with Dr. Winters, who specialized in family dynamics. All four of us attended. Dad was wheeled in from the hospital for a few hours with medical permission. The session was tense but productive, revealing generational patterns that had contributed to our dysfunction. Catherine, Dr. Winters observed, your desire to give Heather everything stems from your own childhood deprivation. And Thomas, your reluctance to confront financial issues comes from watching your parents' bitter arguments about money. These patterns don't excuse what happened, but understanding them can help prevent similar situations in the future. By the end of the session, we had a framework for moving forward, not as the same family we were before, but as something potentially healthier. The road ahead would be long, with no guarantees of success, but for the first time in weeks, I felt cautiously hopeful. As I drove back to Boston that evening, I reflected on how a single decision, giving my mother my credit card, had catalyzed such profound change in our family. Sometimes I realized things need to break completely before they can be rebuilt stronger. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, I drove to Worcester for our now regular Sunday family dinner. So much had changed since that confrontation in the spring, it sometimes felt like I was visiting a different family altogether. Dad's health had improved dramatically after his procedure. Color had returned to his face, and he could now climb the stairs without stopping to catch his breath. The doctors were optimistic about his long-term prognosis, suggesting he might even be able to teach part-time at a local community college, something he'd always wanted to do in retirement. As for my own journey, the path to emotional healing had been neither straight nor easy. There were days I still felt angry about the betrayal. Nights, I lay awake questioning whether I'd done the right thing. Dr. Winters helped me understand that forgiveness wasn't a single decision, but a process that would unfold over time. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or removing boundaries, she explained during one session. It means releasing the expectation that the past could have been different and not letting that past control your future. I'd taken her words to heart, working on forgiving my mother and sister without abandoning the healthy boundaries I'd established. Those boundaries had proven crucial in rebuilding trust, slowly, incrementally, and with occasional setbacks. My sister's transformation had been the most surprising. Heather had not only kept her receptionist job, but had been promoted to office manager. She attended debtors' anonymous meetings weekly and had committed to a 5-year repayment plan for the fraudulent charges. The credit card company and merchants had agreed not to press criminal charges in exchange for full restitution. I've been thinking about going back to school, Heather told me during one of our now monthly coffee dates. Just part-time, to finish my degree. But I'm paying for it myself this time. The pride in her voice was something I'd never heard before, pride in earning something rather than being given it. She was still Heather, occasionally dramatic and fashion-obsessed, but she was growing into a version of herself that could stand on her own 2 feet. Mom's journey had been more complicated. Old habits died hard, and there had been several instances where she'd slipped back into enabling behaviors or financial secrecy. But unlike before, these incidents were addressed immediately in our family sessions. Dad no longer looked the other way, and I no longer stepped in to fix everything. The most significant change came when Mom started attending therapy to address her childhood experiences with poverty and her resulting relationship with money. She'd grown up in a household where appearances mattered more than financial stability, where her own mother had hidden bills from her father and prioritized status symbols over necessities. I never realized how much I was repeating my mother's patterns, Mom admitted during a particularly breakthrough family session. I was so determined Heather wouldn't feel the deprivation I felt growing up that I created a whole new set of problems. My own relationship with money had evolved as well. The financial setback of paying for Dad's procedure had forced me to rebuild my savings from scratch. I'd created a more stringent budget and picked up freelance marketing projects on weekends. But strangely, I felt more at peace with my finances than ever before. Money was just money, a tool, not a measure of worth or love. This newfound perspective inspired me to start teaching financial literacy classes at a local community center. Once a month, I shared basic principles of budgeting, credit management, and saving with whoever showed up. Sometimes just 3 or 4 people, other times a packed room of 20. Seeing the light of understanding in someone's eyes when they grasped how compound interest worked or realized they could create a budget that actually fit their life was incredibly rewarding. My relationship with Dad had deepened through this ordeal. We now spoke on the phone several times a week, having the kind of honest conversations that had been rare before. I was thinking about what you said last week, he told me during one call, about how you always felt you had to be the responsible one, even as a child. I want you to know I see that now, and I'm sorry for putting that burden on you. These acknowledgments healed wounds I hadn't even realized were still open. As I pulled into my parents' driveway for dinner, I noticed Heather's car already there, no longer the luxury model she leased beyond her means, but a sensible used sedan she was proud to have saved for and purchased outright. Inside, the dynamics were noticeably different from the family gatherings of the past. Mom and Heather were preparing dinner together, with Mom actually listening to Heather talk about her job challenges rather than steering the conversation toward appearances or status. Dad sat at the kitchen table, openly reviewing their monthly budget on his laptop, something that would have been unthinkable before. Amber. Dad stood to embrace me. Perfect timing. I was just showing your mother how much we've saved since implementing your envelope system. Mom smiled somewhat sheepishly. It's working better than I expected. We've paid off 2 credit cards already. As we sat down to dinner, the conversation flowed naturally between everyday topics and deeper reflections. When Heather mentioned she'd made another payment toward her restitution plan, everyone acknowledged it positively without dwelling on the past that had necessitated it. After dinner, Dad pulled me aside while Mom and Heather cleared the table. I want you to know something, he said, his voice low but clear. That day when you refused to cover up what happened, it was one of the hardest days of my life, but also one of the most important. You broke a cycle that's probably been in this family for generations. His words brought tears to my eyes. I was so afraid I was destroying our family. You saved it, he said simply. Not in the way any of us expected, but you did. Later that evening, as I drove back to Boston, I reflected on the unexpected path my life had taken. A year ago, I never could have imagined that an act of financial betrayal would ultimately lead to greater authenticity and healing within my family. The experience had taught me that true love sometimes means allowing people to face the consequences of their actions, and that boundaries aren't walls that separate us, but structures that allow relationships to grow safely. The journey wasn't over. Trust was still being rebuilt, new patterns of interaction were still being established, and there would inevitably be missteps along the way. But for the first time in my adult life, I felt like we were functioning as a real family rather than just playing assigned roles. So, what would I say to someone facing a similar situation? The path of truth and boundaries is rarely the easiest one initially, but it's the only route to authentic relationships. Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable harmful behavior, even when doing so brings short-term pain. If you've ever faced family betrayal or found yourself always being the responsible one, I hope my story gives you courage. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary for healthy relationships. And forgiveness doesn't mean allowing yourself to be hurt again. It means freeing yourself from the weight of resentment while maintaining the wisdom that experience has taught you. I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision that ultimately strengthened your family? How do you balance forgiveness with healthy boundaries? Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life stories, and share with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in their family struggles. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes the most painful endings lead to the most beautiful beginnings.